So it's fair to say one of the biggest political shifts I've seen amongst American conservatives is they have gone from one of the most anti-Russian group in Western politics to one of the most pro-Russian groups in Western politics. And a lot of this is to do with just like political commentators and influencers who have put Russia on a pedestal. And you, of course, see that play out in the political realm as well, because Donald Trump seems to be far more willing to let off Putin and Russia for their crimes in Ukraine. He seems to be far more hostile to the Ukrainian government. I would also say that the US conservative government at the moment are still not pro Russia in their foreign policy. They likely still see them as one of the main adversaries. It's just more that on this one issue, I feel like Donald Trump and JD Vance are less pro Ukrainian because of their own political ideology when it comes to foreign policy. But it is pretty fair to say the conservative movement as a whole are more pro Russia. And Russia has always occupied like quite a significant portion of the Western imagination because for obviously my upbringing, it's just been non-stop propaganda about why Russia is the worst and most evil country ever, you know, and Russia has done a lot of terrible things since I've been around. And then in my parents' generation, it was that the Soviet Union was the biggest threat to world peace in the world. And then before that, and before the Communist Revolution, Russia was seen, I wouldn't quite call it exotic, but it was the home of like great literature, great arts. It seemed to be something both familiar, because at least the West was seen as European. It was run by the same royals who ran most of the monarchies across Europe, but it also had that more exotic element to Westerners because of how much territory it bordered, going as far to nearly the American continent, obviously going to Asia. So Russia was always seen as something a bit foreign, and this manifested itself massively in Nazi propaganda against the Soviet Union and just general anti-Russian propaganda across the ages, where their militaries were often depicted like Mongol hordes, essentially. And so much of the Nazi war against the Soviets was a race war against Slavs and against the various peoples of Russia, because Russia is actually like a very diverse country. It's really changed now, where Russia is now seen as, to American conservatives bizarrely, basically nearly an exclusively white, traditional Christian country that has successfully fought back against Western wokeness. And if you guys remember, Jordan Peterson even said that the war against Ukraine for Russia was actually a physical war against wokeness.
Are we degenerate in a profoundly threatening manner? I think the answer to that may well be yes. The idea that we are ensconced in a culture war has become a rhetorical commonplace. How serious is that war? Is it serious enough to increase the probability that Russia, say, will be motivated to invade and potentially incapacitate Ukraine merely to keep the pathological West out of that country, which is a key part of the historically Russian sphere of influence? And the culture war is now truly part of why we have a war. And it's a real war. And it is certainly the case that we do not, therefore, have all the moral high ground. And so the Russians believe that they have a moral duty, and that they have the highest moral duty to oppose the degenerate ideas, philosophy, theology of the West.
Of course, Petey's audience didn't love him saying shit like that, but because of this stereotype now of it being some sort of trad Christian utopia, I made a video like 2 years ago that Russia was creating villages for American migrants who wanted to escape wokeness. I don't think I covered this, but this was followed by a shared values visa, but it also appears it's all gone wrong for a lot of these people. And you probably saw the news that an American dad who migrated with his family to Russia was actually put into service in the war against Ukraine. And in this video, I just want to talk about the failure of the American refugee program to Russia and how these people have experienced the reality, because even if you think you're going to somewhere, going to a country that shares similar values to you, you're still going to be an outsider, and you can't cast off your outsider reputation. So you're going to face difficulties because of that. And that goes for the migrant experience across the entire world. No matter how much you fit in with the language, the culture, even if you have the same religion, you simply being from another place is always going to cause difficulties just because of the inherent xenophobia of most countries. And Russia is a very xenophobic country as well. So, yes, they might not like migrants from other countries, but it stands to reason a lot of them are also not going to like American migrants. And also, a lot of the Westerners migrating to Russia aren't people who subscribe to the Orthodox Christian church. And Christian minorities in Russia aren't exactly treated on par with the Orthodox church. So, you also have that barrier, even though you think that you're Christian. Orthodox Christianity, Catholicism, and Protestantism are not viewed equally in Russia by the government. So, going to get into all of that today. If you want to follow me on social media, follow me at the Kavernacle on Blue Sky and on Instagram. If you want to support my work, check me out on YouTube memberships and my Patreon page. And if you like the video after you finish watching it, please leave a like and maybe subscribe to the channel. So, before we get into the American village and American refugees to Russia story, let's just talk a bit more about what Russia means to Western conservatives at this moment. So you guys might remember that Tucker Carlson did that really embarrassing thing where he went around the Russian supermarket, was showing everyone that yes, there's an abundance of groceries here, and isn't Russia so great because these grocery prices are cheaper than back home in America.
So we're going to try and buy what a family of four would buy every week, and we're going to see what the selection is, and we're going to see what it costs. So we were guessing what this would cost. Everybody here is from the United States, buys groceries, and we didn't pay any attention to costs as we were just putting in the cart what we would actually eat over a week. And we all came in around $400, about $400. It was $104 US here. And that's when you start to realize that ideology maybe doesn't matter as much as you thought, corruption. If you take people's standard of living and you tank it through filth and crime and inflation, and they literally can't buy the groceries they want, at that point, maybe it matters less what you say or whether you're a good person or a bad person. You're wrecking people's lives in their country, and that's what our leaders have done to us. And coming to a Russian grocery store, the heart of evil, and seeing what things cost and how people live, it will radicalize you against our leaders. That's how I feel anyway.
And it was just serving as this propaganda tour to make Russia look really good. And like I said, a lot of American influencers are actually paid directly by Russian organizations, but a lot of them love this image of Russia. And kind of like my video I made recently about the Catholic Church, because Americans are so divorced geographically from Europe at all and don't really experience history in the same way as us, or even geopolitics, right? Because if you grow up in the UK or you grow up in Western Europe, you hear lots of stories about the bad things to do with Russia, the anti-LGBT laws, the discrimination against African migrants, or just their general meddling in European governments and the European press, or just assassinating people, throwing people out of buildings and poisoning and killing exiles and stuff. It doesn't really have a rosy reputation. But if you don't really follow the news and you also see a lot of the conservative stuff as a good thing, you just hear the anti-woke stuff and you see Russia and you see Western Russia and you see white Russians in Moscow, and you suddenly think that, oh my God, Russia is the last bastion of Europe. It hasn't let the migrants in. It hasn't let the refugees in. It's just a white Slavic European paradise where everyone is Christian and every woman is a trad wife. But Americans genuinely believe that, not, again, knowing anything about Russia. And yes, Russia isn't great for minority rights. It isn't great for women's rights. But women still make up 50% of the workforce. There is still this hangover from the Soviet period that still exists in Russia today. Obviously, there's terrible laws against women, including about domestic assault and stuff like that, which we can't downplay. Focus on places like Moscow is funny because Moscow would resemble a lot of European cities more than this trad utopia they have a vision of, right? And also that goes without saying that probably most Americans don't realize how diverse Russia is, or that Islam is the second biggest religion in Russia after Orthodox Christianity, not Catholicism, which is a massive minority, not Protestantism, which is a massive minority, Islam. You also have loads of Asian peoples, native peoples across Russia as well. It's an absolutely huge landmass, and it is very diverse. Not that it's some sort of like multicultural utopia, but if you go to places like Moscow, you are going to see a lot of non-white people, right? So the reality of Russia doesn't really fit into the conservative worldview. And also, the contradiction is these Americans claim to love freedom, right? And while a lot of them are saying they love Russia so much is because they would be free from the wokeness. But Russia is far more authoritarian than most Western governments, especially in its control of information, its control and freedom of speech. I'm not here to tell you that the UK and the US are wonderful bastions of freedom of speech. I don't believe that. And I believe what Russia is today is the future for our countries, both of them. At the same time, it's pretty clear what has worse freedoms generally, and it is Russia. So the only reasons you might go there, if you're an American conservative, is you feel like it's conservative institutionally. But that also feels like a bizarre thing at the moment because America is being absolutely dominated by conservatives at all levels right now. They're literally speed running the country into fascist Christian hell. You'd feel like if you really hated wokeness, the place to be right now would be America under Donald Trump, as it like eradicates loads of civil rights or people you say you hate, like LGBT people and stuff like that. They bought into this propaganda that Russia was some sort of trad utopian Christian paradise that would welcome all Americans. And starting 2 years ago, there has been some sort of movement to try and get American immigrants to come to Russia. So just this story in the Moscow Times 2 years ago: Russia to build migrant village for conservative American expats. Russian authorities will launch construction of a village outside Moscow for conservative-minded Americans and Canadians next year. Russia has for years positioned itself as a bastion of traditional values in contrast with Western liberalism, as its relations with the West have deteriorated over its 2014 annexation of Crimea and invasion of Ukraine. Timur Bezlangorov, a migration lawyer, claimed that around 200 families wish to immigrate to Russia for ideological reasons. The reason is propaganda of radical values. Today they have 70 genders, and who knows what will come next. Many normal people immigrate and are considering Russia, but they're faced with huge bureaucratic problems with Russia's migration law. He said the Moscow region administration had greenlit the construction of the expat village and that it will be financed by relocating the families. The lawyer further claimed that without offering any evidence, that tens of thousands of foreigners without Russian roots would like to move to Russia for similar ideological reasons. There's a website called AmericanVillages.ru. Don't know how much this stuff just, is a scam. But here is what it says on the website. The project is a fully private, non-governmental initiative to help native speakers of English start a new life in Russia by buying a home in one of our communities where they can have the help and support of like-minded individuals. And one of the places near Moscow, I think this is the one we were just talking about, is called Big Water. And it gives you a roadmap how to actually live in this village. And it's run by these three people. There's a guy called Tim Kirby, who's an American, who he speaks fluent Russian, and he hosted a radio show in Russia as well. Basically, it advertises itself as this: imagine living in a rural Russia right off the water, yet having access to all the benefits of a big city. It also says some of the perks for those who live at Big Water: the plots in a wonderful land for an everyday vacation from the hustle and bustle of the city, where you can enjoy the silence and forest air, take a full breath, because here the air rings with purity and freshness. The village is located between two natural bays. Sports on the water will keep your body in shape. There's a nearby yacht club and we've got a dock. So that all sounds well and good. Go live your trad rural paradise in Russia with like-minded Americans. Does seem like that might be an interesting concept for a movie, really, like American conservatives who try and go live in Moscow. But Vladimir Putin announced this like a year ago. There's a Russian shared values visa you can apply for, and the program is part of Russia's response to what it perceives as the harmful effects of Western neoliberal policies. And there's no Russian language required, no immigration quota, and no education or experience required. But now let's talk about why this visa project is failing. Like, there have been people who've signed up to it, and more than the people you've seen in the news. I believe it's like 1,000 people who've tried to take advantage of this from the West. But just on United 24, this article came out this year. Russia's dream village for anti-woke Americans draws only 2 families, sends a father to the war zone. So a plan to build a rural village outside Moscow has largely collapsed due to a low demand and a lack of government support. The project began in 2024 in the Istra district of Moscow, spearheaded by Tim Kirby. Authorities allowed 30 hectares for the settlement, and early projections claimed several thousand Americans were interested. But 1 year later, only 2 homes have been built, each housing a single migrant family. The homes were constructed using standard designs and entirely financed by the new settlers. Gas, water, and other infrastructure was also installed at their expense, supplemented by Kirby. The cost of purchasing a cottage with land reached around $160,000. Kirby told VOTTAC that the project had stalled because of the overwhelming costs that are out of reach for most middle-class Americans. Just the electrification alone cost 172 million rubles, around $2.2 million, he said. Kirby approached various regional governors for support, but all stopped short of offering financial backing. According to Kirby, Russian private investors are unwilling to back a venture aimed at foreigners, and banks are hesitant to approve mortgages for them. So now let's talk about the stories of some of the Americans and Canadians who've taken advantage of this, because it doesn't look too rosy from the looks of things. So, the Financial Times reporting, the Americans moving to wartime Russia for trad values. On a muffled phone line to Moscow, a member of the Russian armed forces deployed to Ukraine can be heard reassuring his family that he is alive and well. But in this case, the soldier is not Russian, he is Derek Huffman, an Arizona welder and father of 6. Huffman left the US for Russia last year with his wife Diana and 3 of their children in a bid to escape a Western society that they saw as going downhill, according to videos they uploaded to their YouTube channels and interviews they gave in Russia. Russia was really our only option, the couple said, alleging the LGBT indoctrination of kids on television, cities overrun by immigrants, and mind-blowing levels of crime. The Huffmans actually arrived before the special visa was launched and faced difficulties in accessing the Russian state school system. To overcome them, Derek decided to join Russia's war in Ukraine. The big reason I'm doing it is for the citizenship, he explained on YouTube, signing a 1-year contract with the army, which would expedite the process. The decision drew reams of criticism. In his call to his family in July, which was posted online by his wife, he defended his choice, saying, "To all the people that are saying I'm a Christian, yet I joined an army so I could go kill Ukrainians, I don't relish the idea of taking life, but I'm doing what I feel is right." He said he was doing something extraordinary with his life rather than living like a sheep on your computer and phone, but most of all, I'm earning our spot and respect in our new country. But look, if he's a guy willing to actually go along with that and actually fight in the Russian military against Ukraine because he left the US because of LGBT indoctrination and wokeness, he might just be one of the rare people who's an actual true believer and maybe buys into Jordan Peterson's theory that defending Russia from Ukraine is defending Russian trad values, right? But at the same time, it seems like his dream is not coming true because the village that he's living in isn't going to be like a real community, is it? Like, no people are really living there. There's 2 of them, and all the funding has dried up because, yes, like, Russians don't love Americans. And although it's great for propaganda reasons, if they're not incentivized to do this by the government itself or from Putin itself, they're probably not going to do it, because while they might share conservative values, you might as well go to Saudi Arabia or Dubai based on your shared values, because you're still going to be a foreigner to these people, still going to be an outsider who doesn't speak their language. And especially if you're Russian and maybe you're a conservative Russian, you're probably not going to like Americans, because if you buy into all the propaganda about the Ukrainian war and stuff like that, then you probably see any Russian soldier who's killed by a Ukrainian soldier as someone who's also been killed by America, right? But just another story about people who've actually taken advantage of the visa itself. Then another family also migrated to Russia, and I think they're the other group in the village that other guy is from. And it says here, the Fenestra family who immigrated to Russia from Canada with 8 children. Arend Fenestra, the father, reports in detail about his new life. Russia is one of the few countries that is still safe for traditional Christian families, he said, adding that it had become increasingly difficult to support his family in Canada, while in Russia the situation was better for them financially. Now, they initially said this, but these people were also going viral, and the Daily Mail reported on this. Conservatives who moved to Russia with family to escape LGBT ideology now says she hates it here because the locals don't speak English, and then begs forgiveness after the Kremlin hears the insults. So Arend Feenstra and his wife Anessa made the decision to move their family of 10 from Canada to Russia a month ago, but their dream appeared to go downhill quickly. The proceeds from selling their farm in Canada were immediately frozen, as their Russian bank account deemed them suspicious, and their struggles led Anissa to erupt into a rant about their new home, which made matters worse after Kremlin officials took a dim view of her insults. In a since-deleted YouTube video, she railed against not being able to speak the language or solve her issues, saying she was very disappointed in the country at this point. I'm ready to jump on a plane and get out of here. We've hit the first snag, where you have to engage logic in a country, and it's very, very frustrating. After the video was taken down from their account, Aren shared a groveling apology video where he said their thoughts aren't always conveyed properly. In a follow-up video in February, he said their funds were no longer frozen and that they intend to stay in Russia for the long haul. Anissa filmed sobbing with apparent gratitude in an earlier video that's still online, although her subsequent behaviour has sparked claims she may have just been trying to disguise her misery. I feel pretty terrible for these two people's children, not least because they have like a horribly conservative set of parents who are probably just going to give them a lot of issues growing up, but also just being moved so far away from what they know, from people who speak the same language as them. It must be really hard, especially when you're going to like a rural community and all the difficulties that are going to go with just having to experience migrant life for these people in a country that is pretty hostile to migrants and Westerners, and their parents just fell like completely for this propaganda. And regardless of political ideology, moving to other countries is very hard. If you guys know anyone who've moved to countries that have like radically different like systems of government or language barriers and stuff like that, it can be really, really hard, and it can be really isolating. And you can visit anywhere and you can think, well, I can see myself here forever. Like, I've lived in Spain for 3 months. I lived in Vietnam for 3 months. I've visited lots of places like, you know, Japan. Every Westerner loves it when they go there. And you think, I could really see myself here. But when you actually speak to someone who's done that, like on my channel, I spoke to a YouTuber called Matriarchetype who immigrated to Japan from England. And while they like really love it and stuff, they said they were treated pretty terribly in the actual like workplace and work environment, even though they could speak Japanese.
Starting my career technically in Japan really affected my opinion of work ethic and my productivity. And I mean, I have some horror stories of the first few companies I worked at. I actually asked to take a day off to fly home to the UK for Christmas. And I had to like walk up, it was like a massive open plan office. And I walked up to the woman from HR who was kind of like the boss's wife. And I like kneeled down behind her and was like, excuse me, please may I take 1 day holiday of my 2 weeks I'm allowed for the year so I can get a cheaper flight home. And she didn't even turn to me. She turned to the entire office and in this bellowing yet feminine voice just said, how long have you been in this company? Under a year. And you have the audacity to ask for a single day off.
Oh, no.
And then she like pointed to the head of finance and was like, head of finance, have you ever taken a day off? No. Head of sales, when was the last time you took a day off? 6 years ago. And you think you should have a day off? Please tell me again why. And like this like 20-year-old nothing of a person, the wisp of a human, just cried, ran to the toilets, and my colleagues came up. I'd been in the company for like 3 months. And so that obviously set me up to this understanding of like my worth is in my productivity. And
because you're always going to be a foreigner, and visiting a place or even conjuring up like some ideal of a place is never going to meet the actual reality. There's always going to be massive hurdles that you're going to have to deal with that you don't appreciate when you haven't been a migrant before. And it so happens they're going to a place that historically in the last 100 years has really hated Westerners and aren't going to be really inclined to help you enough, especially if you aren't trying to learn the language as well. So that is people I don't feel sorry for. Like, I really don't feel sorry for any of these people. And people who are massive, massive conservative bigots are just really stupid and not realizing that just because they're white and Christian doesn't mean Russian xenophobia is not going to apply to them, especially when they are Westerners who do not subscribe to the Orthodox Church. But yes, anti-woke refugees fleeing to the anti-woke Utopia are seemingly having a bad experience because, yes, anti-woke people don't tend to like foreigners. And it doesn't matter what your skin colour is, especially if you don't speak the language, you're not going to be treated fairly. But that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.